Man, I sure hope I don't have to keep banging on about degrowth. I've already done like 2 videos on it. I feel like that should be, the end of it. Articles and tweets, that's nothing. Doesn't matter. But I'm sure nothing existentially terrifying has happened recently, which might make me feel like I need to talk about it yet again.
And when our share of global emissions is less than 1%, how can it be right that British citizens are now being told to sacrifice even more than others? And then there are others who argue with an ideological zeal, we must move even faster and go even further, no matter the cost or disruption to people's lives, and regardless of how much quicker we're already moving than any other country.
I'm a little bit ill today, and I can feel it coming on, so I felt like I should do this video today before I get more sick and before I can't do it, which, feels relevant considering a video on green growth and climate catastrophe to have a sort of firm deadline before things go badly to actually do this. Anyway, I'm drinking lots of water through this today because I feel sick. So although he doesn't use the phrase green growth in this speech where Prime Minister Rishi Sunak decided to largely abandon swathes of green politics, he does invoke a load of concomitant lines of argument.
We've seen rapid technological advances, which have made things like renewables far cheaper.
Lines of argument that are repeated ad nauseum by proponents of green growth. Most notably, he argues that the UK is leading the world in reductions of emissions. And this is a line of propaganda which is related to graphs like these. You've likely seen these graphs, which seemingly show that in a number of economies, GDP and emissions are decoupling. That is, they're becoming increasingly unmoored from one another. GDP is increasing while emissions are decreasing. So for both proponents of maintaining the status quo and opponents of degrowth, they're the same people. These graphs are an incredible resource. They're frequently trotted out as evidence that nothing fundamentally has to change. Granted, many people will say things like, decoupling needs to be better, but they'll cite these graphs as evidence that the fundamentals of the global economy, commodity extraction, accumulation, imperial capitalism, are basically fine. Or if you're one of the sort of supposedly left-wing degrowthers, the notion of commodity extraction to produce endless accumulation of commodities is basically fine, which seems not very communist to me, but what do I know? So the Financial Times, citing these graphs, claimed that, quote, green growth is already here, and that the mechanizations of the capitalist market will take us to net zero all on its own. No need to change. Everything's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Don't look behind the curtain. It's fine. Don't worry.
The great Oz has spoken. Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
None of this is mission accomplished. The world remains a long way from net zero. But we should welcome the fact that investment, innovation and market forces are driving green growth and falling emissions. Look, they say, clearly degrowth is false if there's absolute decoupling of GDP and emissions, and so we can continue on our merry way trotting down the yellow brick road to the apocalypse. And the Prime Minister can trot out such graphs as evidence that the UK is a world leader in emissions reductions and so can afford to do less, I guess. But proponents of degrowth do need to have answers to such graphs. It feels wrong to list them as firm evidence of green growth, but in reality, is it wrong? Yes, it's wrong. So this question of the evidence for decoupling and the potential for pursuing green growth has recently been tackled by Jackson Hinkle's good Waluigi, Jason Hickel. Alongside Jeff and Vogel, Hickel asked whether the decoupling presented in these graphs could provide hope for advocates of green growth. For this, Hickel and Vogel took a deliberately middle-of-the-road view of what the green in green growth means. Basically, what the authors consider green is whether states are on track to meet the targets set by the Paris Climate Accords. That is to keep warming to 1.5 degrees in the best case and below 2 degrees should things go badly. And, this might not be necessarily what... Oh, the cat's wailing. Yeah, sorry cat, you can't come in. I know green growth is not a good topic. It depresses you as well. Oh, man. He's like a horror movie trying to get into this room. So this might not necessarily be what you or I understand as green, but it seems like a pretty justifiable way to approach the question if you're looking to, steel man the opposition. More worryingly for everything though, not for their analysis, but for the world, is that their analysis was based on a conservative understanding of emissions, which only took into account consumption and excluded, agricultural, forestry, shipping and aviation emissions. What this means is that the picture painted by Hickel and Vogel isn't just a steelman debate position, but is the best possible case scenario for decoupling and green growth. And I want you to keep that in mind. The best possible scenario. So how does this best possible picture look? Good, right? Good, right? Good. What Hickel and Vogel have found is that out of the 36 high-income countries analysed, only 11 had so far achieved absolute decoupling of GDP growth and consumption-based emissions. Of these countries, none of them are reducing emissions fast enough to meet the Paris targets. Even the best case scenario of this best case scenario, which is the UK with its low growth and high relative decoupling, a true green world leader, The UK would need to up its CO2 mitigation by a factor of 5 by 2025. That is in 2 years. 2 years to up that by a factor of 5. And they'd have to up it by a factor of 7 by 2030 to have any chance of meeting its targets under the Paris Accords. This again, the best case scenario. And for those states with lower rates of decoupling, they would need to, on average, increase their mitigation rates by a factor of 10 within the next 4 years, with the bottom 4 needing to increase by a factor of 30. On average, for all 11 states, this would mean that they'd have to, on average, increase the rate of decoupling by a factor of 10 over the next 2 years and a factor of 12 by 2030. The best case scenario. But hold on, it can't be that bad, right? Decoupling is happening, so there must be some chance at green growth. The Financial Times told me, and the Financial Times, they're not liars. They already told me that green growth is already happening. The market forces are working. And sure, we might overshoot the 1.5 and 2 degree targets by a little, but, it can't be that bad. You know what? Let's just do some maths. How long on average would it take these 11 countries to demonstrate sustained decoupling of GDP and CO2 emissions at the rate needed to reduce their emissions by the 95% required by the Accord? So it would only take, just doing the maths, it would only take, that's not too bad, only 220 years. Only 220 years. Just expanding the carbon budget by more than 27 times in the meantime. And you can check out the maths there. It all checks out. For real, do look at the actual article, because they do the empirical stuff. You might not be able to clock this. I'm making a joke. This isn't real maths. But it will take 220 years to reduce emissions by 95%, which slightly overshoots the target by 2030 and 2050, which is a lot less than 220 years. The best case scenario. Fucking hell. Oh, it's so grim. So, decoupling is happening. In these 11 high-income countries, GDP has consistently, over a period of at least 7 years, increased while CO2 emissions have been reduced. But the rate of that decoupling falls so far short that it's almost funny in its extremity. You know, if it wasn't so existentially terrifying. Hickel and Vogel label claims that such decoupling is green growth as greenwashing. That is, it hides the real politics of maintaining the status quo beneath the thinnest veneer of green paint. And I'm, in case you haven't noticed, inclined to agree. But what does this mean for us? What does it mean for the world, for the market capitalism that the Financial Times is desperate to uphold? Well, clearly green growth isn't happening. Not in this very generous interpretation of it. Some will argue that as time goes on, the rate of emission reduction against GDP growth will increase. As time goes on, with all the time that we have to go on with, all that time is gonna help. But you do have to ask, will that increase in decoupling rate reach 10 times the rate of today's decoupling in only 2 years? No, it simply won't. Capitalist market forces will not solve this problem, nor will state investment in capitalist market forces. We haven't invented magic yet. And frankly, if we had invented magic, I feel like the capitalist system would somehow find a way to enclose that magic in the name of profit, like a privileged elite class renting out morsels of magic to a proletarian mass. Sorry, I'm just having a fantasy book idea here. Anyway, the stakes here are too high to be clinging to these fantasies of magic and technology and green growth and market forces. We need something else. But before we get into that, I want to again draw attention to the words of the British Prime Minister, because it's not just that these green growth graphs, a nice wee tongue twister. It's not that these green growth graphs are used to maintain existing green policies, but they're clearly being used as evidence to actually reduce mitigation policies.
And when our share of global emissions is less than 1%, how can it be right that British citizens are now being told to sacrifice even more than others?
The UK's high rate of decoupling, alongside the deliberately misleading fiction of a generic green growth, allows the UK to frame itself as a world leader in climate mitigation against other states, and notably, in this case, against China. This provides justification for the Prime Minister to strip back green mitigation policies. After all, we have the space for it. We're the world leaders in green growth, so why not give the go-ahead to start drilling a new oil field, as happened this week? Green growth of oil production. This is fine. I'm okay. Everything's fine. And to add extra horror to this, because, we don't get enough horror in this channel, do we? Everyone's always telling me, John, I like your work, but it's not got enough existential horror to it. It's all a bit too optimistic and light. So just to add some rare horror to this channel, alongside these fake green policies, the stripping back of green policies and the introduction of new oil fields, we can see in the UK the ever more necropolitical border regimes being constructed by our ever more fascistic fucking state. Just this week, our despicable Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, gave a speech saying that fleeing persecution on the basis of being a woman or being queer should not be grounds for granting asylum. And this was coupled with a speech in which she attacks, quote, uncontrolled immigration and the notion of multiculturalism. She invokes tired racist Islamophobic tropes about immigrants in Sweden and in Germany and in the UK, undermining the social cohesion and, crucially, state security due to their inability to integrate. And she also repeated rhetoric, lifted straight from the fascist Great Replacement conspiracy theory about high birth rates of foreign mothers.
If cultural change is too rapid and too big, then what was already there is diluted. Eventually, it will disappear. More than 1 in 5 births are to foreign-born mothers.
This is the construction of the border regime preempting climate refugees. Like, I can't help but see these two actions by the British state in the last week as being intimately connected. The worsening climate is already producing climate refugees escaping the worst impacted places, mostly in the global south. And the British state is ready to warehouse them, to let them die at sea, to create more and more camps to hold them in. And in order to do so, it's dehumanising them as threats to state security. The green growth narrative is allowing this, encouraging it. And I wonder if these people, Braverman and Sunak, know that this decoupling green growth shit is nonsense, but they're so committed to making profit for the ruling class that they don't care about the destruction anymore. Like, I wonder if they know it will produce refugees, so they're building the infrastructure to force them into necropolitical conditions already. And they're using decoupling and green growth as deniability. I don't know, maybe they do believe it themselves, but I do wonder. And regardless, it is of course the case that the maintenance of the globalised market system is predicated on maintaining white supremacy and the production regime through which racialised peoples in the global south produce commodities for consumption in the global north. All the while, this market system creates like a necropolitical zones of exclusion for those deemed outside the production process. If you're using green growth to maintain capitalism, to justify the maintenance of capitalism and the maintenance of the market system, you're also using it to justify this imperialism, this destruction of people. They are intimately connected. I know. Recently I was tagged in an odd critique of degrowth. Like, I accepted the notion that degrowth isn't austerity, and I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. And then I kept reading, and then it said for degrowth to work would require communism, and I was like, yeah, of course. And then it said, which is why degrowth is terrible. And I was like, fuck's sake. And you know, what followed was like a bizarre Cold War style anti-communism tirade, which traded in like 1984 style fears of state bureaucracy, inhibiting the good citizens' freedom in the name of the environment. It was weird. It was a trip. But with the state increasingly and fascistically attacking migrants, queer people, women, racialized groups, and disabled people as well, while pursuing the destructive, extractive capitalist market system, it looks increasingly farcical to me to trade on like anti-communist fears of like lacks of freedom with the aim to maintain that system. The old world is burning. The new needs to be born before we're all sitting in ash. So, as a final point, I want to sketch out briefly how degrowth puts a brake on this potential ashy future. So an essential point in Hickel and Vogel's work is that they only look at decoupling in high-income states. This is not to deny the progress of decoupling in places like Mexico, but because a central feature of the analysis and of a left degrowth perspective is that to ensure global equity, it's the rich states who have spearheaded the systems of extractive capitalism and benefited most from centuries of far higher emissions who have to take the lead in drastically reducing those emissions.
Human activities, like the burning of fossil fuels, have increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere by more than a third since the Industrial Revolution.
And this is like one of the many tragedies about the failures of green growth and pursuing this as some sort of solution. As these rich countries continue to fail to reduce their emissions enough, the space for global south states to develop, for want of a better word, is drastically decreased. This means a further entrenchment of the vast standard of living gaps between the global north and the global south. Maintenance of imperial difference, basically. And on top of that, in order to lower the rates of consumption-based emissions in the global north requires the unshackling of workers in the global south from the economic compulsion to produce endless commodities for the consumption of people in the global north, for the consumption of us here. These consumption-based emissions need to be dramatically reduced for these wealthy countries so that global life can become less profoundly unequal and fundamentally exploitative. And for this to happen requires a fundamental reorganization of social life, a break from capitalism. And look, I understand how this can sound scary to some people. Like, life here in the UK, it's not great. Things aren't going swimmingly. We pay massive rents to live in shit houses, pay expensive train fares or personal car costs. Food is expensive, we work constantly, and access to social life is fenced off behind wealth and privilege. We're bribed to endure this with a glut of commodities, often cheap commodities. So if someone comes along and says, we need not to have as much, we need to have fewer things, fewer commodities, then you're quite justified in saying, get fucked. You know, get fucked. My life is shit. Fuck you. But degrowth doesn't just tell us to have less. It tells us to change the kind of abundance we seek, to ensure that social life in rich countries isn't worsened for oppressed classes. We need to improve standards of life, not through increasing commodities, that's the capitalist way of thinking, but through reducing how much we work, through providing free housing, free accessible public transport, free access to public spaces like gyms and swimming pools and libraries, and just spaces that are being increasingly enclosed under current neoliberal capitalism. And through sharing reproductive labour, not as atomised, often gendered individuals, but as members of a community, and through no longer excluding disabled people from social life because of their perceived value to a capitalist labour market, we can change our understanding of abundance. Suddenly, life isn't defined by the commodities that we can consume, but by so much more. And by breaking the stranglehold rich countries have over the global south through outsourced commodity production, suddenly those global south states no longer have to destructively and extractively produce for us in the global north, but can focus on improving conditions at home. They can also seek to produce a new type of abundance. Global white supremacist imperialism can be shattered to the improvement of everyone. And with this future to claim, one of freedom and abundance contrasted against the artificial scarcity of capitalism, the farce that communist degrowth represents an inhibition of human freedom is fully revealed. Just think of the freedom you could enjoy without the pressures of capitalism crushing down on you right now. Just think for a few minutes, a life that we can dare to claim. But for this to happen, though, it can't be left to just reforming market capitalism, or worse still, letting the machinations of the capitalist market work as it is. It requires a total destruction of that order. It requires the destruction of capitalism and all its supporting structures. That includes the destruction of the violent fascist border regime which reproduces racial class divisions and upholds the disciplinary power of capital, destroying Suella Braverman's dream. Politics shouldn't work on spite, but if there's anything that would motivate me, it is the idea of just destroying Suella Braverman's dream. This also requires a destruction of, the energy companies that extract profit from the destruction of the world. It's not wished into being like the magical future technology that many green growth defenders insist is just around the corner. It's just around the corner.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
But it's fought for and forced into being by all those who are oppressed by the current order. Decoupling is real. GDP in some states is increasing while emissions decrease. But we don't have 220 years to wait until things work out. We have to act now, and the only thing we can do is get involved in direct community and union-based action. We need to build the power of the oppressed classes so that we can have the collective strength to force the new world into being before we're left with nothing but ash and the memory of super profits. This is the best case scenario we should be fighting for.
Alright, thanks for watching. This one, like a few others, I'm doing some shorter videos just to try and increase what I can put out to try and grow this channel. We've been aiming for 50,000 subscribers for about 2 years now. We're gonna get there. I hope you enjoyed this video. It started off quite basic, quite nuts and bolts, and got quite polemic by the end in a way I didn't expect. That's quite fun. If you enjoyed it, then please sign up to my Patreon, assuming Patreon continues to exist, because if it doesn't, I'm fucked. But it exists right now, so please sign up. Or alternatively, I've got Ko-fi and PayPal too. $10 and up patrons get their names read out in the credits, so I'll do that now for those lovely folk. Demo Squid, Dying of Thirst, Soval Hayes, Bonnie, Katie Marshall, Nina G Public Relations, FD Signifier, Lizzie G, Quint Wolf, Kim Crawley, Anita Nispe, Ellis Wren, Sophie, Hey Joe, Cameron Blakemore, Misling, Dan Beans, Layum, Xander Corvus, Pia Westfall, TB Skyen, Christopher Poff, Margussi, Daniel Kusid, Joshua Moldenhauer, Tom Price, Cade Soiree, Esoteric Fictionalism, Shingo, Austin Talman, Polo Lonergan, Robin, Rachel Mixon, Michelle H, Rich, Niels Abelgard, Tinfoil Pancakes, Kieran Gore, Aga Ghost, Barney Carroll, Joel, Daniel Hughes, Nelly Zacheva, J. Fraser Cartwright, Aaron, Tamash Kispeter, and Paul Singleton. Thanks to all those beautiful people whom I, of course, love. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye. Love you. Bye.